Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, I'm Famil Sidegov and I'm Deputy Chairman of the Management Committee and Head of the Finance and Economics block at PGC Gazprom. I'm very happy to welcome all of you at this annual Investor Day of Gazprom. Naturally, we would be happy to meet you face to face, but unfortunately it is impossible as yet. This year, we're holding our annual Investor Day for the first time online. This format has its cons as well as clear pros. In particular, it allows us to overcome the geographic boundaries. We're going to be joined today by investors from various countries and time zones in order to establish a direct dialogue with senior management of Gazprom. I'm very happy to announce that this session is going to be opened with an address by Mr. Alexey Miller, Chairman of the Management Committee at Gazprom. We're going to proceed then with presentations to cover various aspects of Gazprom Group's operations. In particular, Mr. Oleg Aksutin, Deputy Chairman of the Management Committee and Head of the Prospective Development Department, is going to explain the company's development strategy. A presentation on the production block would follow from Mr. Vitaly Markelov, Deputy Chairman of the Management Committee and member of the Board of Directors of PGC Gazprom. Export operations will be handled in detail by Ms. Elena Burmistrova, Deputy Chair of the Management Committee at Gazprom and CEO of Gazprom Export. Gazprom Group's oil business will be presented by Deputy General Director for Economics and Finance at Gazprom Neft, Mr. Alexey Yankevich. Finally, I will conclude with our financial results for 2020 and Gazprom Group's plans for the future. We expect our presentations to take about 2 hours in total. Then we'll proceed with a 5 minutes break. After the break, we'll commence the Q&A session. During the Q&A session, you'll be able to talk to the leadership of Gazprom in real time. Thank you again for your interest. So, we're ready to start. Colleagues, dear friends, it is my great pleasure to welcome all of you at this regular event which we hold annually, and namely Gazprom Investor Day. We're going to elaborate today on the results of 2020 as well as about our plans for the future. The year of 2020 was not an easy one, indeed. First and foremost, due to the COVID-19 pandemic. However, Gazprom managed to overcome all the challenges it faced. The company ensured uninterruptible production of gas, demonstrated flexibility of its management systems, and maintained sustainable position in its markets. At the same time, we fully delivered against our commitments to the off-takers, be it domestically or internationally. In 2020, we produced 453.5 billion cubic meters of gas and exported to Europe and other countries more than 179 billion. And that is our fifth largest number across the history of deliveries of Russian gas to other countries. Based on the results of 2019, the company paid 361 billion rubles as dividends. As for 2020, well, back in January, we kicked off the year by launching a large-scale project, the Turk Stream. It was launched fully in line with the schedule, so Russian gas went via the Black Sea to the markets of Turkey and southeastern Europe. Across the year of 2020, we ensured sustainable delivery of gas via the Power of Siberia pipeline to China. In the fourth quarter of 2020, as well as in the first quarter of 2021, deliveries exceeded the contractual volumes. The Chinese market is the fastest growing market in the world. Together with our Chinese colleagues, we are discussing potential new routes of exports. As of now, we're a little bit changing our strategy, dedicating more focus to establishing new gas processing capacities. This is related to the fact that gas coming from eastern Siberia has many components, including ethane. On top of that, as for Western Siberia, our materials were getting further deeper down into underlying reservoirs. And again, that gas has more ethane. So we're trying to monetize our ethane content of gas. We have two projects of the kind, one in Ost-Luga, the other one, the Amur gas processing plant. These projects represent one of the largest in the world. The first two trains of Amur GPP are going to be commissioned in the course of this year, very, very soon. In the first quarter of 2021, Gazprom expanded its key operating metrics. In the first quarter, gas production exceeded the previous years by 10.5%, while gas delivered to the domestic market went up by 21.4% year-on-year, while deliveries to Europe and other countries went up by 30.7%, or in absolute terms, that would be 12.5 billion cubic meters of gas. This is a very, very good number. These strong metrics early into the year, coupled with a good outlook of our budget performance up until the end of 2021, enabled the Management Committee of Gazprom to approve 50% dividend payout. And that decision comes ahead of schedule because originally it was supposed to be based on the results of 2021. Hence, the Management Committee has approached the Board of Directors with the proposition to pay 297 billion rubles as dividends based on the results of 2020. Special mention goes to our ESG efforts and sustainable development. Gazprom is running a major program to provide gas to the Russian regions by developing the local gas infrastructure. This translates into better environmental conditions. Environmental performance is the foundation of every business process within Gazprom, and these numbers are integrated across the corporate metrics. Gazprom is currently working on sustainable development scenarios up until the year of 2050. Given the low carbon intensity or low carbon economy, at the same time, Gazprom is doing research and development to produce hydrogen from methane without any CO2 emissions. One must also mention the absolute priority of the company. I would like to say here, it's all about safety of operation, safety at work. We are working to improve the professional levels of skills, and of course we are committed to the rights of our employees. Dear friends, the management team at this company is working to ensure harmonized development of Gazprom in the interests of the company, the community, and our shareholders in order to boost the investment attractiveness of Gazprom. I would like to thank you for your interest in Gazprom's operations. I would like to hand over to my colleagues now. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, hello. I'm Oleg Eksutin, and I'm leading the investment and strategy block of Gazprom. Today, I'm going to explain the company's development strategy. 2020 became a true challenge for the global economy, the energy sector in particular. The black swan of the COVID-19 pandemic has resulted in a decline of economic activity and hence a downfall in demand for commodity products, including natural gas. The 2020 crisis has affected the current market environment globally for commodities and affected the short-term tactical decisions taken by companies of the sector, while longer-term trends and targets remain unchanged. That's what Gazprom is basing its strategy on. First and foremost, it's about sustainable growth of demand for natural gas in the longer term. Now let's consider independent views on the dynamics of the global energy mix and energy balance, as well as demand for commodities. In the coming 2 decades, two are going to be in the lead, and namely gas and renewables. I often hear that gas is simply a bridge fuel. Well, we can call that a bridge. According to all recent assessments, that bridge goes far beyond the horizon. We're standing at its first pillar, while the bridge covers many decades ahead. This defines Gazprom's prospective projects. What else do we need to take into account? Gas is unique in terms of its environmental characteristics. Gas is feasible economically and competitive as well. Gas remains in high demand at the other end of the energy bridge. Let's consider the more recent examples. In 2021, Europe saw a rather cold winter, hence more demand for gas. In Texas, there was a shortage of gas supply, which resulted in millions of people living without light and water supply. This demonstrates that gas is the fundamental of sustainable and efficient energy system, while sustainability of energy system is coming down, while the interruptible energy sources such as wind and power is increasing. So the demand for gas is going to grow. How much in demand is it going to be? Let's consider the numbers. At first glance, the key growth point is renewables. In the global energy sector, their share by 2040 is going by 4 percentage points to 9%, while the share of gas is only by 3% to 27%. Nonetheless, there is a clear contribution of natural gas into satisfying the global demand for energy. As expected, by 2040, natural gas is going to satisfy about 40% of new demand for energy, as compared to 34% for the renewables. Gazprom is closely watching the most recent assessments according to prospects of the global energy sector, and we also have our own views, as well as based our judgment on most respected independent sources. And then opinions may differ as to other questions, but on gas, it is united. Gas is the most important energy resource of future decades to come. Growing demand for gas creates a favorable macroeconomic environment that also facilitates Gazprom's long-term strategy. I'm going to discuss strategic targets of the company for the upcoming decades and explain key projects at the domestic market in Europe and in Asia. I'm going to explain the prospective financials of the company and its contribution into low-carbon footprint development. Let me start with strategic developments at the top of the chain, that is production. Gazprom has a clear gap against the competition across the following metrics. The volume of proven reserves, annual production, annual volumes of exports gas, and demand at its key market is growing. Hence, the company is expanding its resource base. The development of a new gas production center at Yamal is going to ensure most of the increase in production into the future. The company is developing unique fields at Yamal, including Bovanenkovo, Kharaseve, and other fields. Thanks to these and other promising fields, total production of gas at Yamal by the end of the decade is going to exceed 200 billion cubic meters per annum. In parallel to that, we're going to keep developing production capacities at the base of Ob and Taz, as well as Nadim Taz. We are going to start producing from underlying reservoirs at the Achimov deposits in Urengoy. We are going to launch new fields such as Kamennemiske More and North Kamennemiske. Demand for gas is growing in the east of Russia and in exports market, mainly China. This demand is going to be covered with fields in eastern Siberia and the Far East. We're talking about unique fields of Chayanda and Kavikta. Their total annual production volume, according to the design project, stands at 50 billion cubic meters. On top of that, Gazprom is developing its production capacities at Sakhalin. The share of natural gas in Russia's energy mix stands at around 54%. Gazprom Group delivers about more than 60% of total gas consumption in the country. The company ensures reliable supply of gas during the autumn and winter and guarantees energy security in the country. Russia's energy strategy targets particular gas consumption volumes. By 2035, it could be as high as 520 billion cubic meters. These targets ensure growth of sales in gas in the longer term. According to the orders of the Russian president, Gazprom is targeting 100% of local gas infrastructure development by 2030. Improvement in gas infrastructure is going to allow Gazprom to increase its market share. Considering the domestic market, we must also take note of the environmental side of Gazprom's operations. The importance of the global environmental agenda is growing. Against that backdrop, the company is trying to do more environmentally with green projects and reduce emissions. Gazprom does dedicate a lot of attention to that matter, but we are trying to do real work to reduce our environmental footprint. Development of gas infrastructure suggests transition of coal-powered generation to gas. Let's consider the per unit emissions. Transition from coal to gas is 10 to 50% more efficient than transition from gas to renewables. And one cannot give up hydrocarbons in the observable future. It's impossible. However, we are doing systemic work to reduce emissions now. We're improving the health situation in Russian cities and improving the quality of life. We're also reducing the carbon intensity of the Russian economy and making a major contribution to low carbon footprint development in exports markets. Hence, we are delivering gas by pipeline to Europe and China. In December, we celebrated 1 year since the start of supply of Russian pipeline gas to China. The Siberia pipeline delivers gas to one of the fastest developing markets in the world, in China. With its launch in 2019, Gazprom became the first company to supply pipeline gas to both Europe and Asia. We are also the largest supplier of natural gas in Eurasia. Now let's discuss the largest import-oriented gas markets in the world. I'm talking about Europe and China. By the end of the decade, gas consumption in China may well reach the level of and exceed that of Europe. In Europe, gas demand is going to stay at about 500 billion cubic meters, while demand in for gas consumption in China is growing. By 2030, total demand in both target markets may well reach 1 trillion cubic meters. Indigenous production in Europe is falling, while in China it's growing at a lower pace than demand. Hence, imports are going to grow from 470 to 550 billion cubic meters combined in both markets. So, what we are looking at now, there is clear more demand for imports in the target markets. Secondly, the portfolio of long-term contracts at Gazprom is coming up to 250 billion cubic meters in total. And one other thing, we are implementing prospective exports projects. All these drivers are going to reinforce the company's position, but not stopping at that. Gazprom is interested in creating new modern export routes that will allow us to implement yet another strategic priority in our exports, thus improving reliability of gas supplies. Considering long-term prospects of new pipelines, what's the capacity of new pipelines towards Europe and China? It's about 330 billion cubic meters of gas per annum. It's about one-third of targeted demand or forecast demand in both markets. Reinforced positions in external markets will be supported with high competitive edge of Gazprom supplies. Europe has more than half a century of mutually beneficial cooperation with China. Russian pipeline gas has become synonymous for our European partners with reliability and stability of supplies, while in China we are building up our presence and winning the trust of the off-takers. We are efficiently developing our operations in China, and this is proven by the fact that the Chinese side is constantly requesting more gas and daily orders. This was true in 2020, this is true in 2021. Interest of our Chinese partners to increase deliveries via the Power of Siberia has a very simple explanation. Pipeline gas by Gazprom is the most optimal source of imports for target markets in China across many metrics. First and foremost, it's very competitive. Russian pipeline gas wins over its main competitors, let's say gas from Central Asia and LNG under long-term contracts. And the reason is very simple, a very short transportation leg from the border to the capital region. In 2020, the only gas competing against Russian pipeline gas in the region of Beijing was spot-sold LNG. Its price went down because of oversupply in the global market. But then again, we can remember what happened with low prices in 2020 with spot-sold LNG in Asian Pacific. In early 2021, they became record high, up to $1,000 per thousand cubic meters. As a result, importers incurred significant losses. Supplies via the Power of Siberia have a very clear benefit, defense against the volatility of the spot market and the prices. Finally, the Power of Siberia offers sustainable supply, in particular cold weather. This was very much on the agenda of Chinese off-takers in the last season. Supplies from Central Asia do not ensure sufficient stability and sustainability, especially in winter. The same is true for LNG. LNG tankers could not offload the gas because of the ice in the north of China. Demand for gas supplied by Power of Siberia opens up new opportunities to expand cooperation with Chinese companies, and new pipeline projects towards China have a huge exports potential. When implementing new projects, in particular pipeline projects to China, Gazprom is going to maintain its balanced approach. This approach is about efficient and sustainable development of the company with strict control over its annual investment program. Our CAPEX plan strategy is based on the following. The CAPEX plan is not a fixed constant, it's a flexible mechanism. Instead, it allows Gazprom to reach its targets within the framework of a volatile market environment. Our investments are going to serve for decades as a good foundation for high production volumes and ensure well-satisfied demand in the export market. The key to our success is sustainable growth of gas production, growth of supplies to domestic markets and externally, and improvement of efficiency thanks to modern high-tech pipelines. All of that is going to yield a very good additional economic effect. According to our calculations, the company's EBITDA is going to grow by several trillion rubles in the coming decade. This will provide good financial results of Gazprom's operations. in the interest of our shareholders and investors. Now let's discuss those interests a little bit in greater detail. Gazprom, as a global energy company, understands its responsibility with future generations to come. I'm talking about the environmental side of our business. Minimizing its environmental impact and low carbon development represent important priorities for Gazprom. When considering the domestic market, we have already discussed expansion of the gas distribution infrastructure and reduction of emissions. As to the exports market, let me explain how we are going to supply gas externally. I'm talking about environmental advantages of gas transportation using modern pipelines. On the screen you see independent research, according to which Russian pipeline gas has minimal environmental impact as compared to our potential competitors of LNG. Just for your reference, carbon footprint from pipeline gas supply from Russia could be compared to the length of stride from a person, while supplies of LNG from Qatar and Algiers to the stride of an elephant, while supplies of LNG from the US to the stride of a dinosaur. With efficient modern pipelines, the company would like to see opportunity rather than threat in environmental transparency. We are ready to contribute to low-carbon development of Europe and China. The stats and our emissions of greenhouse gases is absolutely transparent and verified by respectable international agencies. Gazprom Group's measures to improve energy efficiency and reduce the environmental footprint yielding results. Greenhouse gas emissions in 1 year went down by nearly 15%. We have managed to ensure achievement of corporate environmental goals. Emissions in the year went down by 17%, while emissions of methane by 21%. We intend to keep investing to use best available technologies, improve energy efficiency, and improve gas infrastructure and gas availability across Russian regions. In 2021 through 2025, we're going to invest more than ₹500 billion towards that end. This huge investment serves to prove that we're ready to contribute into green future. Considering the longer-term prospects, an additional instrument to develop that could be broader use of hydrogen. Currently, more than 3/4 of all hydrogen in the world comes from natural gas. Gazprom's priority is about developing hydrogen, developing means to produce hydrogen from natural gas. In the future, we would like to do that without any CO2 emissions. According to current assessments, it's much more efficient to do so with natural gas rather than renewables. Further reduction of carbon footprint is possible with the following two means. One is about broader use of methane hydrogen fuel, including for gas transportation, and secondly, about using and developing innovative technologies of hydrogen production without CO2 emissions. Across these areas, Gazprom is already doing R&D to help develop natural gas-based hydro energy. Thus, we are making a strong foundation for this energy bridge. Now, I would like to focus on the company's goals for the upcoming decade. In the production segment, we would like to ensure sustainable growth of production at economically feasible fields, given the domestic and external market environment. We're going to do that thanks to new unique gas production hubs, mainly in Yamal and in the east of Russia. Gazprom will keep reinforcing energy security of Russia, contributing to low carbon development of the country and ensure energy security of the domestic market. Here we would like to develop the gas distribution infrastructure and ensure sustainable supply of gas to the off-takers. On the export side, we would like to reinforce the status of the leading supplier of gas in Eurasia. This will be achieved through maintaining our position in the European market and significant growth of exports to China using existing pipelines and new arrangements with Chinese partners. Growth of the Economic indicators would be ensured through flexible approach to the investment and capex plan and growth of the free cash flow. On the environmental and sustainable development side, the company is going to keep making a major contribution to achieving global goals in climate change. Thank you. Colleagues, hello. I'm happy to present for your information some data about production operations of Gazprom. Gazprom produces 68% of all gas in Russia and 12% globally. Please note that our production potential exceeds 500 billion cubic meters per annum. As of now, gas production comes thanks to the following capacities: 7,570 active wells, 191 complex gas treatment stations, as well as 71 compressor stations. Gazprom is the largest subsoil user in Russia. On our balance sheet, we have 32.8 trillion cubic meters of gas reserves and 1.8 billion tons of liquid hydrocarbons, excluding those of Gazprom Neft. Our company does annual reassessment of its hydrocarbon reserves under JORC with an independent auditor involved. Gazprom owns the largest gas transportation network in the world. The length of trunk pipelines and connections as at the end of 2020 stood at 176.8 thousand kilometers. In order to even out the seasonality in gas consumption, we have underground gas storages. As at the early 2020 offtake season, the reserve in them stood at 72.3 billion cubic meters, while maximum capacity reached 843 million cubic meters per day. A major area in Gazprom's operations is processing of natural gas and liquid hydrocarbons. As of now, the refining complex of Gazprom includes 3 gas processing plants and 4 refineries and condensate processing units. The Russian fuel and energy complex has Gazprom's processing complex as its number 1. It ensures 100% of helium supply, 85% of sulfur, 20% of liquefied hydrocarbon gases, and 5.7% of motor fuel. Gazprom has a feature in the broad spectrum of hydrocarbons it processes. At its facilities in Orenburg, Astrakhan, and Surgut, we process stable gas condensate and high sulfur liquid hydrocarbons. In the region of Nadim-Purtaz, we're building alternative arrangement projects which would allow processing more volumes of gas condensate from Achimov deposits. The new condensate stabilization unit is to be commissioned at Urengoy plant for gas condensate transportation treatment in 2021. As the result, volumes of liquid hydrocarbons to be processed will increase by 4 million tons per annum. On top of that, we are implementing the Amur gas processing plant project and the gas processing complex in Ust-Luga, Leningrad region. Development of the gas processing complex at Gazprom would allow us to process wet gas into high-value added products, protect its basket from the volatility of commodity markets, and diversify sales of gas through larger LNG volumes. The Amur gas processing plant is part of the so-called Eastern Gas Program at Gazprom, while feedstock for Amur is coming from Irkutsk and Yakutsk gas production hubs through the trunk pipeline of Power of Siberia. Amur gas processing plant is a single technological complex with two major objectives. One is to produce commodity gas in line with contract specification to supply to the People's Republic of China, while the other objective is to extract valuable components from the feedstock, such as ethane, propane, butane, pentane-hexane fraction, as well as helium to be sold domestically and internationally. The design capacity of Amur gas processing plant is going to be 42 billion cubic meters, with 38 billion cubic meters of commodity gas to be delivered into the Power of Siberia pipeline. This makes this project the largest gas processing facility in Russia. Amur gas processing plant is also going to include the largest helium production unit in the world, with up to 60 million cubic meters per annum. Also, up to 2.4 million tons of ethane is going to be produced, as well as up to 1.5 million tons of propane and butane fraction. The first phase is going to be commissioned in 2021, with full capacity to be reached by 2025. This project is financed with project financing with a total amount of 11.4 billion euro. This project is facilitated by banks from China and Russia, as well as international banks from Germany, France, the Netherlands, Italy, the UK, and Japan, with guarantees from export credit agencies in Germany and Italy. The financing is up to 17 years long. This money will facilitate uninterruptible financing of this project throughout its construction phase, with the advanced social and economic development area benefiting from the following, such as tax benefits for insurance, property tax and land tax, as well as VAT rebates upon request and the free customs area. All these benefit Amur GPP. In order to extract as much valuable components as possible from the hydrocarbon feedstock, Gazprom has also decided to build a gas processing complex in the vicinity of Ust-Luga, Leningrad region. It is going to be fed with ethane content of gas from Nadym-Kurtaz region. It is going to be supplied via dedicated pipes of the uniform gas production system. This project is run together jointly by Gazprom, Rusgaz-Dobыча, JV, Rushim Alliance. The capacity here is 45 billion cubic meters per annum, producing 3.6 million tons of ethane per annum and up to 1.7 million tons of liquefied hydrocarbon gas. The ethane will be fed to the Baltic Gas Chemical Complex, while liquefied gases will be sold for exports and delivered by sea. About 18 billion cubic meters of commodity gas will be streamed to Russian and European off-takers. This complex includes an LNG facility with a capacity of 13 tons per annum to be supplied externally. We have already received a positive state expert review, and early work has already been commenced. The Ust-Luga plant is going to be commissioned in two phases with a capacity of 22.5 billion cubic meters of feedstock gas each. Now let me say a few words about the gas distribution program and development of gas distribution infrastructure in Russia for 2021 through 2025. This belongs to one of the priority areas for Gazprom. Last year, Gazprom's chairman of the management committee, Mr. Alexei Miller, and leaders of 67 Russian regions have signed up to the gas supply and gas distribution network development program for 2021 through 2025. Capex for that is already part of Gazprom's investment program and that of Gazprom Межрегион Gas. Thus, by 2026, we are going to increase domestic gas supplies to by 21.8 billion cubic meters per annum. Gazprom is also working to reduce sanctions risk from using foreign manufactured equipment. That's why we have a systemic effort for import substitution in order to reduce exposure to imported technologies, equipment, and services. We're doing that across all operations of the company, from geological exploration to hydrocarbon processing, with the objective of producing the technologies and equipment internally. In order to do so, we have set up ties with state corporations, large enterprises, the defense and military complex, as well as leading research and development institutions. The company has adopted a list of most important types of products for import substitution and localization. Reducing that list is the key performance indicator towards that goal. From 2015 onwards up until today, we are producing 70% of that list locally. The total economic effect from import substitutions from 2016 through 2020 has already exceeded 50 billion rubles. On top of that, it's growing every year. Nowadays, we're working with Russian firms and companies towards import substitutions, with major focus on most technological areas with most research capacity, such as production of liquefied natural gas and underwater production of hydrocarbons. Hence, we have a track record of cooperation, the competences we have built on the side of other Russian firms and companies, and support from the government. This ensures timely and efficient implementation of Gazprom's prospective projects. As at the end of 2020, Gazprom Group is #1 in Russia in terms of installed capacity for heat power generation. We have 13% of all electric power generation in Russia as well. All generating assets of Gazprom Group are consolidated within Gazprom Energo Holding, managing 78 power plants of Mosenergo, TGK1, OGK2 in 17 regions of Russia. The utilities business of Gazprom Group ensures stable cash flows for the company. In 2020, Gazprom Energo Holding is going to meet its targets in net income and EBITDA. Dividend payout based on 2020 are going to be no lower than based on 2019 results. Gazprom Group is targeting reliable supply of energy to its processing capacities. In 2021, we'll be finalizing 2 priority generating facilities. The one is Svobodninskaya thermal power plant for 160 megawatts for Amur gas processing plant, and the other one is Pančeva thermal power plant in Serbia. On top of new construction, we are doing overhaul and upgrade of existing equipment. In 2020 through 2026, it's 2 gigawatts of capacity, or 22% on the first price zone. The group intends to stick with the competitive capacity contracts for 2027 through 2031 and would also bid for innovative Russian-made GTUs for 2027 through 2029. Green energy is another development area. TGK1 selected in a bidding process in Murmansk region to construct a small hydropower plant on the river Paz. Delivery is targeted for 2021. Capacity contracts are effectively support mechanisms ensuring a guaranteed return on investments. The actual return would vary from year to year, depends on the situation of the financial markets in Russia. Gazprom understands its responsibility to ensure a safe environment at work and caters to industrial safety and fire safety. This is a part of our strategic planning. Our strategy up until 2021 has allowed Gazprom to reduce the number of incidents by 51% with a target of 30%. The number of injured people went down by 49%, while the number of accidents and incidents is down by 64%. Last year, a new industrial safety strategy was adopted for the year up to 2030. This is fully in line with best international practices. In 2020, it got certified for ISO 45001. Operations of Gazprom is stable and sustainable. It ensures reliable operations of the uniform gas supply system across the country. It also provides sufficient volumes of gas to Russian and international off-takers. Gazprom is actively developing gas processing and power generation. In the upcoming decade, Gazprom is going to see a new stage in its developments through fast-tracked gas supply and gas distribution development in Russia. Thank you. Hello, colleagues. In my part of the presentation, I would like to explain Gazprom's position in the international markets. I'm going to comment on pipeline gas supplies as well as LNG. I'll comment on the forecasts of market situations and also our prospects across the board. In 2020, all oil and gas companies of the world faced a very unfavorable economic environment. Spot prices in global gas markets demonstrated a record low. In spring and also in summer, they hit their historical minimums. This ideal storm was made possible due to a combination of several negative factors simultaneously, such as mild weather, lockdown due to COVID, and the global economic crisis. All of that was happening against the backdrop of excessive supply of gas on the market. One must mark that the probability of last year's market situation to remain in the longer term is pretty much zero. Such pricing levels cannot be sustainable in medium to longer term. They don't even cover the margin costs of most gas producers. On top of that, we see market fundamentals getting back to normal. In this environment, the positions of PGC Gazprom and the external market give us some optimism. Our company lived through the unpredictable year of 2020 with pride and maintained its market share. We sustainably diversify our supply destinations and secure our foothold in new markets. We're increasing volumes via new pipelines. We are developing additional trading mechanisms, thus improving flexibility of the whole market. We successfully satisfied excessive demand in extremely cold winter months. In particular, we see much more stable position in the European gas market than a year ago. After a major slump in early 2020, we saw some volatile growth of global gas prices and European prices in particular. It is explained, among other things, by a fast recovery of demand in Asia and reduced supply of LNG. Thanks to availability of pipeline gas, our gas to off-takers, we saw significant growth in the second half of the year. Volumes of LNG imports remained low. In early 2021, the European gas market became balanced again, while Gazprom managed to demonstrate its competitive advantages, and leadership was to be maintained thanks to low cash cost, flexibility and reliability of supply, developed infrastructure and a portfolio of contracts. We demonstrated that we were ready to continue competing against new suppliers, and we also served a reliable and flexible supply to European off-takers, balancing and stabilizing the market. One must remember the cold winter of 2020 to 2021. It even caused the threat of blackouts in certain countries and reinforced the key role of pipeline gas to ensure reliability of energy security in Europe. In 2021, the pricing environment in Europe is going to be more predictable than the year before. Now, let us recollect the situation in early 2020. The winter was mild in Europe and underground storage inventories were high, and there were the risks about concerns rather about Ukrainian transit. All these drivers affected the price. Early in 2021, the situation has been reversed. Gas inventories are significantly lower than last year's averages. It is related to cold winter and the outflow of LNG towards Asia. The need to replenish inventories would support demand and prices in the upcoming summer. On top of that, the recovery of the European economy is going to support demand for energy in general. Thus, the critical situation of excessive supply is not going to be repeated this year. Hence, the exports policy of Gazprom has proven its efficiency even in the very complex environment of 2020. In the second quarter, spot prices went down to their historical minimums, less than $40 per thousand cubic meters, while Gazprom's average portfolio price was around $100 per thousand cubic meters. In 2020, the average exports price for Gazprom exports exceeded the month-ahead TTF index, standing above $130 per thousand cubic meters. Thus, Gazprom managed to live through the peak of last year's crisis with some good financial results, and this was made possible thanks to our well-balanced portfolio of long-term export contracts. Our company demonstrated resilience against most significant pricing fluctuations. More than half of export volumes were sold with a link to spot indices for day or month ahead. At the same time, about one-third had a link to much longer forwards. About 13% of the whole volume had an oil link in the pricing formula. Gazprom keeps adapting its contractual model to fit the developments of the gas market. Our portfolio enables us to find the right balance and hit the sweet spot between selling the gas at competitive market prices and the strive to prevent excessive dependency on the volatile environment. Thus, we maintain our position in the market. Our electronic trading platform has proven its flexibility last year as well and kept developing. It ensured additional volumes of sales and capacity utilization of the transportation facilities. It has also helped us stabilize the European market. With the spot prices coming down, we reshaped the platform to trade longer period products. This reduced pressure on spot prices. Our sales electronically in 2020 went up by 12 billion cubic meters year on year and exceeded 27 billion cubic meters, including forwards. On top of that, last year we successfully implemented trading instruments with new types of pricing and supply periods. This allowed us to sell seasonal products with deliveries in 2021 and 2022. On top of that, we have penetrated new markets, selling our first volumes to Turkey. Our company is successfully moving towards diversified destinations in Europe. This allows us to reduce the risks and costs of transit as well as greenhouse gas emissions. Despite the strong sanctions pressure, Nord Stream 2 project is underway. In mid-December 2020, pipeline work continued. The timing of the full section underwater depends on a number of sectors, such as the weather, the timing of the works, etc. All work is going on fully in line with permits obtained. On top of that, early in 2020, we commissioned a Turk Stream project, which is in good shape and operating well. It reliably supplies Russian gas via the Black Sea to Turkey and 6 European countries: Bulgaria, Greece, North Macedonia, Romania, Serbia, Bosnia and Herzegovina. Once Bulgarian, Serbian and Hungarian national operators have expanded their gas transportation systems by autumn 2021, we could expect deliveries to start in Hungary via the new route. Hence, Turk Stream capacity utilization is set to increase. Gazprom is also working systemically to expand and diversify its routes towards China. Despite the pandemic of COVID-19 in 2020, gas demand kept growing in China. According to preliminary assessment, about 325 billion cubic meters of consumption were registered in that country. It's about 6% higher than in 2019. We are ramping up our supplies via the Power of Siberia. In 2020, we delivered 4.1 billion cubic meters of gas. In the cold winter of Q4, the Chinese side requested higher deliveries as compared to what we have in the contract. In 2021, the growth of supplies continued fully in line with the contract. In 2030, by 2030, we expect significant growth of gas demand in China by more than 50% compared to the level of 2020. Key drivers include active government policy to replace coal with gas. Also, the government is stimulating to grow the share of gas in the national energy mix, and generally favorable macro drivers, including the growth of the Chinese economy. Gazprom is going to become one of the key beneficiaries from the growth of gas demand in China. We are going to ramp up supplies via Power of Siberia, and this would also stimulate development of additional gas transportation projects in the region. Gazprom is continuing its efforts to finalize negotiations according to previously agreed routes. We're also working on a new project to supply Russian gas to China via Mongolia. In December 2019, we signed an MOU with the government of Mongolia. It provides a joint assessment of this project to see whether it can be implemented. In August 2020, we signed an MOI with the government of Mongolia to set up an SPV. Its objective is to develop feed for construction and operations of Soyuz Vostok trunk pipeline via the territory of Mongolia. In January 2021, this SPV was registered in Mongolia, and it's called Gas Pipeline Soyuz Vostok. It has started its investigation. On 10th and 11th March this year, their experts flew over the potential route for this pipeline in Mongolia. An important element to diversify the sales markets is LNG business. Gazprom's group's position in LNG is relatively modest as compared to what we supply by pipeline. 2020 became a breakthrough year for our operations on the LNG trading side. We have doubled trading of our LNG portfolio to 7.4 million tons, as well as the number of destination countries to 14. These numbers have been achieved thanks to a significant increase in trading operations on the spot and short-term markets. Another positive driver is the fact that Gazprom Group has increased its LNG sales towards the design shelf. On top of that, in 2020, we have started a new operating LNG center of Gazprom Export in St. Petersburg. This center is in close contact with our existing offices in London and Singapore. The whole point here is to reinforce the presence of Gazprom Group in the global LNG market and set a foothold for new LNG projects in Russia. The key element here is the Ust-Luga complex in Leningrad region to process ethane content of gas and produce LNG. We are also developing LNG bunkering in Russia. In December 2020, the first bunkering vessel, Dmitry Mendeleev, was successfully launched, and it is expected to start operations in 2021. LNG projects open up some good prospects to supply a product which is principally new to the market, which is carbon-neutral LNG. Pretty recently, on the 8th of March 2021, the first transaction of the kind with Shell was run. LNG was delivered to the buyer. CO2 emissions across the full chain of production, transportation and consumption were offset with dedicated certificates, and we see a huge demand here for customers who share our wish to protect the environment as much as we can. Colleagues, major changes have occurred on the global gas markets. Nonetheless, Gazprom's positions as an exporter remain strong. We are optimistic about the prospects of our gas in Europe. Reduction of indigenous production in Europe is going to support demand for imported gas. Discontinued coal-powered and nuclear power generation, growth of demand for electric power and increased capacities of renewables will see more demand for gas as well as an element guaranteeing stability of the energy system. Gas is fully aligned with ambitious climate change goals. In a reasonable and reliable energy system, it's going to maintain its key role, also as a means to produce hydrogen. Gazprom is working towards that end. Thank you for your attention. Over to the next speaker. Hello, I'm Alexey Yankevich, and I represent the oil business of Gazprom Group. Let me begin with the environmental and climate agendas. The importance and relevancy of these issues for Gazprom Group is getting ever stronger. The oil business has activated its efforts towards this end. Based on the results of 2020, our emissions for Scopes 1 and 2 is down by 16%. We are successfully implementing environmental projects such as the biosphere. As a result, the Moscow refinery has seen installation of new water treatment facilities with efficiency of up to 99.9%. A similar project is currently being run at our facility in Omsk. Further pilot projects in green energy are currently underway. In 2019, we completed the first solar power station for 1 megawatt in Omsk region. It is going to feed administrative and accommodation buildings at Omsk refinery. In Serbia, we're building a wind power plant for 102 megawatts together with our partners. 2020 was a difficult year for the whole group of Gazprom, with demand and prices for oil and oil products coming down. This has affected the oil segment, of course. Nonetheless, we demonstrated good resilience and started recovering our financials rather soon. The oil segment became positive on the net income starting from the second quarter of 2020, much faster than our colleagues in the oil industry. The oil business of Gazprom is comprised of two major areas and segments, if you wish, and namely upstream and downstream. Let me start with upstream segment. We have established a well-balanced portfolio, which includes our traditional producing assets in Western Siberia and Orenburg, and secondly, new growth projects, mostly in the Yamal, Krasnoyar Krai, and Eastern Siberia. Thirdly, prospective projects in early stage of development and the new cluster of gas condensate fields currently being shaped at Bovanenkovo, Harasovey, Urengoy. This portfolio is comprised mostly of new projects in development phase, representing more than 650 million tons of oil equivalent. This includes Zima project, which is about development of Zhagrin fields in Khanty-Mansiysk. Our well-developed infrastructure in this area establishes a good synergy. Recoverable reserves exceed 130 million tons, while peak production is going to stand at 6 million tons. Another important project is about oil fringes at gas fields of Pestov, Yan-Yakhinsky, and Western Terko-Sakhalin. This represents a good synergy with available infrastructure and additional monetization for Gazprom Group. All these projects allow us to compensate the reduction in production at our traditional fields and create growth opportunities. We all understand there are certain, uncertainties given the oil market. That's why we're trying to manage our portfolio in a flexible way. Hence, we're developing a tool to mitigate that risk in the form of partnerships with Russian and foreign companies. This allows us to share risks and fast-track monetization of oil projects. Another important portion of the portfolio is about exploration projects and early-stage projects. They allow us to recover the resource base and create the longer-term potential. However, they have risks. We try to resort to partnership here as well in order to share geological as well as financial risks. A significant portion of such projects is being implemented in such format already. And a good example here, a good case, is our project with Shell for exploration of the Gidon Peninsula. Finally, a new growth point of our portfolio is about wet gas at Neokom-Yursky deposit of Harasovey, Bovanenkovo, and Urengoy fields. We are talking here about complex reserves with a multitude of components, and a good example of how we can use the competences and experience built in the oil business. We intend to use most modern drilling technologies with complex geological structures. We are talking about an efficient monetization model for Gazprom Group reserves across the board. Let me explain in greater detail how we create partnerships. This tool allows us to have significant flexibility against the backdrop of uncertainties in the oil market. We have established a good portfolio of projects of interest to many potential partners, and we have some JVs already established to certify that. This is an efficient tool to develop our assets. On top of faster monetization of the reserves, it allows us to build additional value by bringing in experience and competences from the partners. I can give you examples of two exploration JVs with Shell and Repsol, as well as partnership with Mubadala to develop mature assets. We also work in partnership with Russian companies such as Lukoil, Tatneft, Novatek, and Zarubezhneft. We are currently in active discussion to establish yet another JV based on Meritayakh Neftegas to develop Tazovsky and Severosambursky fields. I expect you to hear some news based on the discussions of St. Pete Economic Forum. Let's proceed to the downstream segment. First and foremost, let's talk about the modernization program for our refineries. It targets improvement in refining depth and optimization of the petroleum product basket. It is currently in the active stage, so next year, or by next year, we're going to finalize Modernization of the Omsk refinery, the largest one in our portfolio, is going to reduce production of heating oil and increase production of light petroleum products. On top of that, we'll be able to produce synthetic oils groups 2 and 3. Based on that, the Nelson Index is going to reach best benchmarks of European refineries. With the recovery of the petroleum product markets, it would allow us to create as much value across the full chain as possible. We are happy that the government understands the importance of the modernization program and creates economic stimuli. We have entered into an agreement with the Ministry of Energy. Thus, this year we'll be getting a negative excise already. Let's discuss the results of the Gazprom Group's oil business for 2020 and compare that against other companies across the board. It is common knowledge that the oil business is developed by Gazprom Neft within Gazprom Group. Now we compare this company's performance against many other Russian companies operating mostly on the oil sector. We are in the leadership across many metrics, especially when it comes to net income. This serves to prove resilience of our business even against the backdrop of volatility in the oil market. We're also playing an important part in cost optimization across Gazprom Group. This has allowed us to demonstrate one of the best developments in per unit costs, as you can see on the chart of operating expenses per unit. Let me quickly comment on the capex program of Gazprom Group's oil business. Sometimes we are criticized for high per unit capex, given that the OPEC Plus deal is in place. Let's consider the breakdown for 2020. The thing is, we are actively upgrading our refineries and investing into new growth points, which are not linked directly to the OPEC Plus facilities. We're investing into partnerships that are going to yield fast monetization of our reserves. If we adjust by these amounts, we'll get to the capex of 2014 and 2015. And then we have reduced the capex by 20% vis-à-vis the business plan as part of Gazprom Group's effort. This is a great result if we compare that to our companies in the industry. We again have one of the best per unit capex developments year on year. Now let's sum it up. The oil business of Gazprom Group has maintained great resilience in a tough environment. We keep implementing projects successfully that yield additional value for the group, and we create new opportunities to monetize various categories of reserves. Thank you for your attention. Well, now it's my turn to proceed with the presentation. Let's consider the financial and economic performance of Gazprom Group. As explained by my colleagues, 2020 saw the ideal storm in the global commodity markets. It peaked in April through June, with causes very well known. First and foremost, it's about lockouts and lockdowns, as well as other measures related to COVID-19. These caused a lower demand for natural gas and oil. Sometimes it was abnormally low. Secondly, the pandemic was further aggravated by the disagreements between participants of the OPEC Plus agreement as to how the deal could be extended. Once it expired in March 2020, at the end of the month, oil production went up, hence the global commodity prices went to their record lows. Thirdly, the winter of 2019 and 2020 was abnormally warm. Average ambient temperature in Europe was 3 degrees higher than the average across the last half-century. For natural reasons, this constrained demand for gas in Europe. Lower demand has resulted in turn with overstretched gas storage capacities. In March 2020, underground gas storages in Europe were 60% full, while if you consider the average numbers of March in the last 5 years, it was never above 38%. Fourthly, LNG suppliers had to continue with their supplies, even incurring losses. This resulted in excessive supply of gas in Europe. As a result, European gas hub prices plummeted in the first half of 2020. In May, they hit record lows from 1995. The minimal price stood less than $1 per MMBTU, or less than $30 per 1,000 cubic meters. This price was 4 times less than the price in early 2020. The extraordinary circumstances just explained became a most complicated stress test for Gazprom's financial position. Now we can say that we lived through this stress test with pride. First and foremost, thanks to our conservative financial policy. Please be reminded that Gazprom's budget for 2020 was made in such a way so as to include a significant reserve fund or liquidity cushion of nearly 700 billion rubles. This liquidity cushion allowed us to finance all of the company's liabilities without any additional measures to adjust the budget. However, we understood how acute the situation was. Throughout the year, we ran a monthly exercise to analyze all of our costs and income lines line by line, and we updated the budget not only for the holding company but also for the sub-holdings, in particular Gazprom Neft, Gazprom Energo Holding and Gazprom Межрегион Gas. Budgets of all our subsidiaries went under regular control with strict focus on cost optimization. This approach has resulted in very specific positive results in the crisis environment and became a good foundation for longer-term improvement in efficiency of our budgeting process. In 2020, Gazprom continued working to centralize the cash flows and liquidity. As at the end of 2020, the single cash pooling system included 583 companies of the group, and total consolidated liquidity exceeded 720 billion rubles. A single settlement center and a single cash pooling system for the group allowed us to distribute the cash flow efficiently and reduce the volume of external debt required by the subsidiary companies. This was made possible thanks to intragroup financing. In 2020, its volume went up nearly 5 times to reach more than 48 billion rubles. Another productive instrument to support our work was banking supervision of the group's contracts. A fully-fledged implementation of this instrument allowed us to control expenses under Gazprom Group's contracts with external counterparties. With all these tools and instruments playing an important role, nonetheless, a major response to external challenges came through a major cut in operating as well as capital expenditures. I'm going to tell you more on that. Gazprom Group's operating expenses in 2019 stood at $99 billion. In 2020, that was lowered, $79 billion. The gap is 20%. When doing the cost-cutting exercise, it was important for us to maintain the production plan intact and ensure reliability of gas supplies to off-takers. We managed to save a lot on optimizing procurement of oil and gas. We reduced the costs for exploration, heat and power supply, as well as a number of other administrative and managerial expense lines. Outside the cost optimization plan remained the so-called protected lines, such as taxes, payroll, social payments, insurance, as well as COVID-19 related expenses. On top of that, the free cash flow of the company was supported to a great degree by optimized capex. Across the group, it went down by 27%, from $27 billion in 2019 to $20 billion in 2020. Most of the cuts was achieved in the gas business, more than $4 billion. We reduced the capex across a broad spectrum of projects. This optimization, however, did not affect any rescheduling for the key projects. Now we are targeting the so-called cautious recovery scenario. We keep optimizing operating as well as capital expenditures. When shaping up our budget for 2021, we set the limits while considering the results achieved on the cost-saving side last year. Even with the cost-saving measures in place, the extraordinary drop in gas prices in the first half of 2020 resulted in a negative outcome as expected. The EBITDA went down, hence our net debt to EBITDA went beyond the comfort zone. As at the end of 2020, it stood at 2.6. And throughout the year, there was real threat of net debt to EBITDA growth above 3. In order to address that threat, we acted preventively. Thus, we managed to minimize the reduction of our EBITDA. In order to do so, we introduced systemic cost-cutting, as I have already explained, and secondly, increased exports of gas in terms of volumes given better pricing environment in the second half of the year. The EBITDA went down for every company across all the oil and gas sector. However, our drop was 17 percentage points less than the industry average. We have reduced traditional loans by 129 billion rubles as compared to the original plan. And then in October 2020, Gazprom became the first company in the CIS to place perpetual Eurobonds. Please be reminded that under IFRS rules, this particular instrument does not increase the company's debt burden, but rather is accounted for as equity 100%. We issued $1.4 billion and 1 billion euros worth of Eurobonds, perpetual Eurobonds, which resulted in 1/3 of the total placement program for the holding company. In March 2021, the Bank of Russia registered an issue of perpetual ruble bonds. They targeting the program to improve gas availability and build the local gas distribution grids. Project financing was also fast-tracked. In August 2020, we closed a deal of project financing for the second stage of South Russian field in the amount of 40 billion rubles. In the future, we expect to proceed with this format of financing in order to develop our own fields as well as those where we have strategic partners. Simakovskaya with Rusgazdobycha, Levorskaya and Noviskaya with Lukoil, and Urengoyskaya with German company Wintershall Dam. For 2022, we are targeting project financing for gas processing complex in Ust-Luga. Diversifying the sources of financing allows us to reduce the burden on the company's balance sheet. We expect that in 2021, the net debt to EBITDA would come down to our comfort level, which is lower than 2. Thanks to these measures, in the ideal storm situation, Gazprom responded well and efficiently. This is proven by sustainability of our credit ratings as well as positive reviews from the market analysts. Across 2020, all international and Russian rating agencies confirmed or remained in place the credit rating of Gazprom. As compared to the general background of the oil and gas market, I can give you this example. Like last year, the credit rating went down for 36% of oil and gas companies in the world, while 27% of other companies had rating downgrades. Thus, even in the crisis period, rating agencies still certified sustainability of Gazprom's financial position, and the equity markets responded equally. PGC Gazprom shares remained attractive in 2020. More than 75% of investment analysts recommend to buy PGC Gazprom shares. As at the end of 2019, it was 58% of such recommendations. Please note that recommendation to sell is not seen for Gazprom currently. Please mark it as well that PGC Gazprom is sustainably in the 22 companies of MSCI Russia index with the relative weight of about 17.5%. Please be reminded that in 2019 the board of directors at PGC Gazprom approved a new dividend policy for the company. It targets more dividend yield for the shareholders with a gradual increase to paying 50% of IFRS net income. We have already discussed the macroeconomic and pricing environment of 2020. What I can add here, in the current circumstances, about 60% of all largest international oil and gas companies have announced either reduction of dividend or decided to discontinue them completely. About 90% of such companies have reduced or cancelled their buyback programs. The total payment to shareholders or yield to shareholders for international oil and gas companies went down by 25%. However, Gazprom's management decided in 2020 not to adjust their net income downward and stream 30% of IFRS net income as dividend. This translates to about 36% of 2019 adjusted net income. As a result, we paid 361 billion rubles as dividends in 2020. Thus, we met our commitments and even exceeded those commitments of the new dividend policy. PGC Gazprom became one of the leaders in terms of dividend payments of all Russian public companies. Those measures that this company took to improve the financial performance and positive development of its operational numbers met the recovery of oil and gas markets in the second half of 2020. Thus, in the second half of the year, we managed to offset the losses of lower prices early in the year and, more importantly, get back into pre-crisis levels in terms of exports volumes. As a result, our numbers for 2020 appeared to be better than major metrics of the adjusted budgets and expectations of most analysts. Our revenue stood at $88 billion, while EBITDA was $20.4 billion. These results allowed us to finance all of the projects we had planned for. We also maintained comfortable liquidity. The total amount of deposits and cash equivalents at the end of the year stood at $14.2 billion. This exceeds our maturing loans for the upcoming year by 1.5 times. Most of the financial results comes from the gas business, producing $53 billion of revenue and $10.1 billion of EBITDA. The second most important segment of the group is oil business, which generated $5.8 billion of EBITDA. Given the high volatility of last year, the utilities segment of our business played a major role as well. It provided sustainable EBITDA of $1.5 billion and a positive free cash flow exceeding $400 million. Clearly, it was impossible to avoid a drop in financials in 2020. One must admit, however, that the pace of Gazprom's revenue and EBITDA coming down was more moderate than across the largest oil and gas companies on the average. This was ensured thanks to the competitive advantages of Gazprom and timely measures to improve the financials and also a well-balanced structure of the group's business. Considering Q3 and Q4 of 2020, the market environment improved significantly. We still maintained, nonetheless, a conservative approach to our budget composition for 2021, and we're also targeting very strict limits on operating and capital expenses. We base our budget for 2021 on conservative assumptions. They are rather modest given the current export prices, however, and even though they are, we still see a significant growth of financials. Revenue is up by 16%, the EBITDA is up by 9%, the free cash flow is back into the positive, while the liquidity cushion is growing and the leverage is coming down. down. The capex program for the holding company in 2021 remains at a relatively low level of 902 billion rubles. The group's capex is going to be slightly higher than in 2020, standing at around 1.5 trillion rubles. This increase is related to the expanded program of local gas distribution network construction in the regions by Межрегионгаз. The first 3 months of 2021 demonstrated a significant improvement in the global oil and gas markets. We analyzed our budget and the actual numbers for the first 3 months for 2021 and updated our forecast for the full year. Based on the current market situation, we are expecting a significant growth of Gazprom Group's financials and reversal to pre-crisis levels. Our EBITDA is going to grow by more than 50% as compared to 2020, as compared again against the more conservative growth of 9% in the original budget. Now, the growth of net income is definitely going to move up the dividend base, while control of the capex will ensure free cash flow going back into the positive. The free cash flow is going to cover dividend payments for the year of 2020. The leverage control is going to take our net debt to EBITDA back into the comfort zone of less than 2, and we believe 1 through 2 is the comfort zone for us. Growth of the income side is going to reduce the need for bringing in new loans by more than 100 billion rubles as compared to the budget for 2021. The positive forecasts of free cash flows for 2021 allows the management committee to recommend paying the dividend in the amount of 50% of adjusted net income as early as based on the results of 2020. Thus, we are 1 year ahead of the dividend policy in terms of this target level. This serves to prove yet again that growing dividend yield is a priority for the management of Gazprom. In 2020, there were major non-cash items which resulted in lower net income. In particular, I'm talking about accounting lines of 605 billion rubles. According to the dividend policy, non-cash items serve as a basis for adjustment for the net income. So in 2020, or based on the results of 2020, the dividend base is 595 billion rubles, significantly exceeding the net income profit. Half of that amount, 297 billion rubles, will be paid as dividend. The final recommendation is to be made by the Board of Directors in May. Starting from the following year, based on the results of 2021, the 50% payout is going to be the minimal threshold for us. On top of that, we expect the free cash flow to fully cover the dividend payments. It is important to market that Gazprom is fully committed to sustainable development principles. Caring about the environment and ensuring safety at work are among our priorities. They are well integrated into the corporate governance system already. In particular, we have midterm and short-term goals to reduce emissions, which we achieve every year thanks to the measures we undertake. The carbon footprint in gas production for Gazprom is one of the lowest in the industry. Our efforts to preserve the climate and counter climate change are reflected in the company's ESG ratings. Gazprom has leadership position of all Russian oil and gas companies in CDP ranking, which is one of the most respected. In order to achieve strategic goals and sustainable development, we have a dedicated policy recently developed, and in the nearest future, we'll have it approved by the Board of Directors. On top of that, we have launched a project to consider low-carbon scenarios up until the year of 2050. Our next steps include establishing a Sustainable Development Committee under the Board of Directors and appointing a senior independent director. As explained by my colleagues today, the European gas market has recovered after the stress of the first half 2020. This is clearly demonstrated by gas price charts across the recent 9 months. Given a visible improvement of the market environment, many many investment analysts are marking a good upside for Gazprom share prices. We're confident that as the external markets improve, the investment attractiveness Gazprom will be reflected in its market cap too. To conclude my presentation, I would like to emphasize it yet again. The growth of shareholder value is clearly the priority for the management team at Gazprom, and we expect Gazprom share price to benefit from an upside. There are reasons for us to believe so. First and foremost, Gazprom has very strong fundamentals, which we clearly demonstrated in the crisis year of 2020. And secondly, improved environment in the oil and gas markets and the expected growth of Gazprom Group's income have not been fully reflected in the valuation as yet. Thirdly, Gazprom is going to develop based on sustainable development principles. Every year, we're reinforcing our work in the field of environment, safety, social responsibility, and corporate governance. Fourthly, our long-term strategy ensures well-balanced development of the business based on our key competences. Fifthly, we intend to grow shareholder return while maintaining sustainable financial position thanks to generating a significant free cash flow. Thank you for your attention. After a 5 minutes break, we are going to start our Q&A session.
Investor Day. Thank you very much for joining in and listening to the presentations. And thank you for staying over for the Q&A as well. I'm Alexey Fenikov, and I'm Deputy Head of the Finance and Economics Department at PGC Gazprom. I'm going to moderate this session today. If you didn't manage to catch up with the presentations during the first part of the Investor Day, they are available at Gazprom's website. Let me start with a few technical comments of administrative nature. This session has simultaneous interpretation provided, so please select your language of preference. It is available in the interpretation panel at the bottom of your screen. And please don't forget to turn off the original audio. If you wish to ask a question, please raise your hand by pressing the raise hand icon. And please don't forget to turn on your video feed. On top of that, you can ask a question through the Q&A menu and Zoom. Your questions will be handled by the same speakers you hear the presentations from. These are uh, CEO of Gazprom Export and Deputy Chair of the Management Committee, Ms. Elena Burmistrova, and then Mr. Famil Sadigov, the CFO of the company and Deputy Chairman of the Management Committee, Mr. Oleg Aksutin, Head of Department for Long-Term Development, and also Deputy Chairman of the Management Committee, and Chief Accountant, Mr. Mikhail Raseyev, as well as Deputy CEO for Finance and Economics at Gazprom Neft, Mr. Alexey Yankevich. And uh, uh, before you can ask a question, we're going to move you over from viewers to panelists. Hence, your settings will drop. So as we move you over from viewers to panelists, please select your language again in the language menu, and then you can ask that. The first question will come from Mr. Karen Kastanyan. Karen, please go ahead. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for the presentation. I hope you can hear me. Yes, Karen, we can hear you. Please carry on. Again, thank you very much for the presentation. Mr. Sadigov has referred to page 58 of the presentation with the outlook that he used, with the assumption that he used for your 2021 budget. I'm wondering how you have adjusted those expectations during the year in order to understand how aligned we are in our financial forecasts. At least, if not for your financials, maybe you can comment on the prices in Europe and also volumes to be exported to Europe. And if you can give some guidance on the financials, this would be very, very useful. Thank you. Yes, thank you, Karen. Colleagues, I'm very happy to welcome all of you again. This year we're having this rather unusual format. Very sad to see that. Well, last year we still managed to talk to you much closer and discuss a broader range of questions. But nonetheless, let me get to the point. Splitting your questions into two. One is about the volume and price for Europe. I would ask Ms. Burmistrova to comment on that, and then I'll get back with the financials. Ms. Burmistrova, Elena? Good afternoon, colleagues. Indeed, this is a very unusual format. Very happy to see, nonetheless, if not all of you, then at least some of you. I'm happy to welcome all of you at this unorthodox or unusual Investor Day, as unusual as the last year. We took average price of $170 per 1,000 cubic meters. That was part of our budget in view of the year of 2021. That is a conservative approach. While the market situation now sparks us with optimism, according to preliminary views, the average realized price on Gazprom's portfolio is $184 per 1,000 cubic meters for the full first quarter. Thus, we could cautiously speak of the average full year's price within the range of $200 to $206 per 1,000 cubic meters. That's my guidance as of now. Although we see that the situation is extremely favorable in underground storages, the inventories are pretty much empty following a harsh winter in Europe, and that boosts us with optimism. Thank you. Okay, thank you. And as for the financials, obviously Q1 2021, as explained by Elena, and we can see that on the volume side as well, and on the prices. Obviously, the results obtained in Q1 affect our expectations for the full year. Our EBITDA for 2021 in the budget stands at 1.6 trillion rubles. However, um, even a cautious outlook today gives us some further opportunities to expect a growth of another 50%. That's true, 50%. Indeed, the 2020's base is low. That's why we are planning for some good growth. Like 330 billion rubles uh, would be taking us back to the year of 2019 and those levels. On the capex side is expected to be flat at 1.5 trillion rubles, or somewhat higher than that amount, which is explained by the additional needs of the gas distribution network development program. The free cash flow with high prices and high volumes, so we're confident about the fact it's going to be positive, of course. Um, Even paying 297.1 billion rubles of dividend, which I have explained in my presentation as well. More than that, with these great numbers, we intend to reduce our borrowing plan by 100 billion rubles as compared for the full year. Well, that's it in a nutshell. Thank you very much. Now, a quick question to Ms. Burmistrova. To follow up, could you provide some guidance on the volumes to be exported to Europe? Can you give an update? Well, I would suggest a range from 175 or 6 to 183 BCM. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Karen. The next question is coming from Mr. Andrei Gramadin, Sberbank. Andrei? Good afternoon. Hello, Andrei. Unfortunately, we can't hear you. Could you please pick the Russian language? Yep. Can you hear me now? I have a very quick question. That's rather unexpected for you to move up to 50% dividend payout 1 year earlier than the plan. The amount of 300 billion wouldn't be a scare for such a major business like you, but according to our calculations, with 50% payout retained into next year, the absolute number will double and get closer to $10 billion. Mr. Sedegev, are you morally prepared to pay that much? Would you expect that your free cash flow would cover so much dividend payment and the leverage would still stay below 2, as is your plan? Thank you. Thank you for your question, Andrei. Frankly, I wouldn't challenge your calculation. That's your calculation about the 10 billion, of course. But again, when the company adopted its dividend policy, and we discussed that last year with you at length, at the time, we took a responsible decision, and we're taking that responsibly. Our objective is to gradually move up from 30 to 50% from 2019 onwards. Again, that is factored into all the metrics. Indeed, our resolution today to move over to 50% payout a year earlier is calculated too. Please understand one thing. Q4 and Q1 2021 has given us an opportunity to showcase that to investors. We would like to demonstrate our intent that dividend is our key priority, the focus, if you wish.
И более того, когда я очень осторожно говорил о том, что даже при
Further to
выплате
that, I cautiously put it that even if the dividend based in 2020 would be 297 billion rubles, the net debt to EBITDA would move down to below 2. But again, that's a conservative approach, right? Um, with the current market situation and our expectations, could suggest that our leverage gets further down to 1.8, taking into account the dividend payment. So at the same time, our plan is to cut down on our borrowing plan by 100 billion rubles. So we'll be paying 100 billion rubles more than bringing in. On top of all sorts of financial tools, our financials will be supported by strong free cash flow. I have always said it. That's the foundation behind our commitment to pay. At the same time, we're developing our gas, oil, and utilities business, which will be boosting the group's EBITDA. We'll still be focused on cost control looking forward. As a result, our free cash flow is set to grow, which in turn would cover the growing dividend. Yet again, without commenting on your calculations, to produce an answer to your question, a responsible approach to decision making allows us to commit to that number earlier this year and focus on the longer term on the return for our shareholders. Thank you, Andre. Please don't forget, and that's a reminder to everyone asking a question, please don't forget to reselect your language channel before you proceed with your question. And the next question is coming from Mr. Ildar Davletsin. Please go ahead, Ildar. Good afternoon, and thank you very much for this opportunity to ask a question. I would also like to thank you for a very detailed presentation. It's so high quality, even more detailed than in the early years. I have a question on the capex side. You have provided us with very exciting calculation that suggests several trillion rubles of additional EBITDA in a few years to come, thanks to the new projects. I'm wondering if you can provide a clearer range, like what are the macro assumptions underlying it. Your capex is going to be several trillion rubles in real term. What would be the split between growth capex and maintenance capex? And yet another question to that end, if I may. I'm talking about SPVs. As far as I understand, you intend to use SPVs more actively. An SPV is going to handle the pipeline to China via Mongolia, as far as I understand it. I also get it that your plans could be more ambitious, that is exceeding 1.5 billion rubles of investments. However, part of that is not going to be consolidated and financed in the non-consolidated businesses, a tool which you did not resort to as frequently in the past. And you're going to use it now to reinforce your cash flows. Is this correct? Well, thank you. Yes, indeed, I mentioned it in my presentation. And happy to repeat again, our capex of 1.5 trillion rubles, or slightly more, as we have explained here today. So it's slightly more than my expectations a few years ago. So for the following year, 2021, we expect about 1.5 trillion again, or somewhat more. Now, split between maintenance and growth. I think I have mentioned that on numerous occasions previously. Our own split is like 40 to 60, 40 maintenance, 60 growth. As to the new EBITDA yielding projects, again, I may repeat myself because we have discussed that on numerous occasions. Our key projects now in implementation are Power of Siberia, Turk Stream, Nord Stream 2, the Amur GPP, then the Ust-Luga projects. All of these major projects are going to bring us additional EBITDA in the course of these years, like of about $9 billion US. I think I have provided a breakdown earlier for each project, so you must know that well. I also understand your question about this SPV, like project financing. Frankly, I didn't mention any SPVs, especially the one in Mongolia. You mentioned that. But indeed, we have decided internally to resort to project financing on broader terms, hopefully without recourse to our balance sheet. In 2020, we intended to close our joint project with Rusgazodobыча for Simakovsky field, but it was closed eventually in 2021. So that project is on, and we have a number of similar projects to get on board in the course of 2021 without any impact on our balance sheet. This includes our internal projects with lease payments, as well as partnerships projects with 50-50 split, again, without affecting our balance sheet. I have mentioned some of those in my presentation, and some are going to materialize before the end of this year. You are well aware of my approach. We intend to showcase everything to you in as transparent way as possible. We'll be explaining what we do and how we do it, the effect we'll be getting from that. So we will be doing that in the course of the year. But you're quite right, we have quite a lot of projects in the pipeline with similar arrangements, including the large LNG and gas processing facility in Ust-Luga. It's going to have project financing attached. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ilda. Our next question is coming from Evgeny Deshluk, Gazprom Bank. Evgenia, please go ahead. Evgenia, please don't forget to pick the Russian language in your settings. Can you hear me now? Yep. Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you for this opportunity to ask question. I have a question about your plans related to China. What are your discussions? What are you talking about? What are the volumes? And what are the priority areas or destinations, rather, routes? Thank you. Thank you for your question, Evgenia. As for China, well, I believe you're well aware of all the routes we are currently discussing, which we discussed at Gazprom Investor Day a year earlier. Nothing has changed since then. We are considering a variety of new destinations or routes. As Mr. Sidygov has explained, we set up an SPV in Mongolia, which is going to focus on the FEED study of that project. So it's too early as yet to consider the shape of the project. We need to look at all the numbers and then do some decision making. Thank you. Can you say that the situation with gas prices in Asia back in winter has really reinforced your negotiating position for new exports projects? We have seen an unprecedented level in terms of prices. So in my view, given that environment, Gazprom projects seem to be much more attractive. Thank you for your question. Indeed, so true. But it's more than pricing alone. It's also about sustainability and guaranteed supplies, which is important. Our Chinese partners are effectively asking us to deliver more on top of our contracted volumes, which we managed to do successfully, as compared to our colleagues from Central Asia. That was really valued. Normally, there is a slump in delivery volumes in winter. In our case, it was otherwise, which was very valued by the Chinese side. In joint sessions and discussions, well, the Chinese uh, positively surprised about the upside in our deliveries. Our European partners are well aware that we fully honor our contractual commitments, but for the Chinese, it was an unprecedented situation. And given the high prices in Asia, they had to buy on the spot market. But you also remember how high the spot prices were, with some transactions counting at 100 oh sorry $1,000 and even more. So given that, against that backdrop, Gazprom has a huge competitive advantage. Thank you. Thank you, Evgenia. Our next question is coming from Ron Smith, BCS. Please go ahead, sir.
Hello.
Go ahead.
Здравствуйте, Ром, вас видно?
Hi, Ron. We can see you. Please go ahead. Yeah, you can ask a question.
Слышно нормально?
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
My очередь. Yeah. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for the call. I have two questions, if possible. First, regards TurkStream. On what were the volumes going via TurkStream in 2020? And what are the plans for potentially expanding that in 2021? And second, has to do with the cost optimizations that you put in your presentation, the 2.3 billion of cost optimizations in 2020. Are these sustainable going into 2021? Or was it this influenced also by the unique market situation of last year? Thank you.
Сейчас, извините, связь. Слышно меня?
Thank you. Hope you can hear me. Hello?
Слышно. Такое ощущение, что отключен микрофон, пишет.
Okay. Thank you, Ron. Thank you for your question. Well, first and foremost, let's do the definitions, because your question may have some dual meaning. When we speak of TurkStream, when we say the words TurkStream, we're talking about a pipeline on the bed of the Black Sea from the Russian shore to Turkey. And then from Turkey onwards, it goes further to the border in Bulgaria. So when we say European extension of TurkStream, this wording is incorrect, because we are talking here about a different thing. It's the national operators in European countries who will be extending their grids and expanding their grids, which is a continuation of TurkStream, but not particular TurkStream. Our deliveries to Turkey went up by more than 106% in 2020. It's somewhat more than 11 billion cubic meters as at the end of Q1. So you can see very high volumes going to Turkey this year, and it's not coming down. I believe we'll keep ramping up at the same pace. As to that extension, back in 2020, TurkStream delivered gas to off-takers in Turkey, Bulgaria, Greece, and North Macedonia, as well as Romania. As of the 1st of January 2021, deliveries started to Serbia and Bosnia and Herzegovina using the national grids of those national operators. Thank you.
Да, второй вопрос,
And as for your other question, in my presentation, I did dedicate quite a lot of focus on the cost-saving side. Just for you to understand, that was a very practical issue last year. Starting from February last year onwards, we were working with our budget. We're making all the calculations, and we were effectively we were redoing our budget every year, recalculating everything for up to the end of the year, and thinking of the cost cutting. Indeed, the first half of 2021 was a major shock for the company, so some serious decisions were there to be made. Hence, we decided to reduce our operating expenditure by 20% and the capex by more than that percentage. Obviously, we kept our social expenditure in place. It was not taken down; it was even taken up sometimes when it was about COVID-19 related measures. In 2021, the situation is as follows: our budget planning exercise begins in September of the previous year. We took the reduced cost base back in September last year to make the budget for 2021. That was the foundation or the base. So we have the reduced amount by 20% because that's exactly by 20% that we reduced in 2020. We had salary adjustments by lower amount than inflation, although that would be normal in major companies, including Gazprom, to hit the inflation target. So, and responding to your question, yes, it rolls over into the next year. Thank you.
Спасибо большое, Рон.
Thank you, Ron. And our next question is coming from Mr. Igor Kuzmin. Igor, please go ahead.
Добрый день. Меня слышно?
Good afternoon. I hope you can hear me. Yes, Igor, please go ahead. Great. First of all, I would like to thank the management team for dedicating your time and making this detailed presentation about a variety of questions. I have a capex-related question, and namely, the gas distribution infrastructure development. As far as I understand, the company is going to allocate about 120 billion rubles towards that end, and that's per annum every year from 2021 onwards. As far as I understand, some regional gas infrastructure development costs are not taken by Gazprom. Instead, other regional companies have to bear these costs. As of recently, the media has reported that some of those costs, those regional costs, may well be handed over or rather taken by Gazprom. I'm wondering whether these reports are realistic. What volumes could we be talking about, and how this is going to be financed? Because the media have reported, among other things, a potential additional issue. How can you comment? Well, thank you. Let me handle this question, although I am going to comment on some of the statements you have made as part of your question. So I'm going to correct those a little bit. Indeed, in this country, we have this gasification program or a program to develop local gas infrastructure for 2021 through 2025. that's about 105 billion rubles every year, or 526 in total for the full program. So it's only 35 billion more than what we had allocated towards the same end in the previous year. In 2021, indeed, we have a larger amount of 128 billion rubles, again, part of the total 526. But since we were making that plan last year, we also have the target of reducing the leverage. Hence, decision has been made to finance this infrastructure development program not from our EBITDA and not from raising more debt, but by issuing perpetual ruble bonds instead. Last year, we had a very successful transaction with dollar and euro denominated Eurobonds that are perpetual. So we do intend to have a placement, and the central bank has registered a program to issue of up to 150 billion rubles, possibly in two tranches, starting from Q2. So far, a decision hasn't been made. But the board is going to approve potentially and implement this plan. This placement plan also has government support for the coupon payments, supporting the investors rather than Gazprom, because the government would like to make this tool attractive for investors. That's the point Gazprom is paying. Now commenting on your what you call regional expenses. Indeed, this last mile in the settlements and villages going to be handled by the Russian regions, not by Gazprom. It's their commitment that they have to deliver against. And you're quite right, the government is currently considering how these projects could be implemented, how these could be financed. So I cannot give you any answer. No decision has been made. Hence, I don't think I can comment. Indeed, Gazprom could be considered as a single operator of the program to develop regional gas distribution grids, which could potentially reduce the cost side of this last mile pipelines. But again, so far, no decision has been made by the government. In case they come up with this decision and Gazprom gets involved, obviously, we'll be considering together with the government as to how to compensate for that. Against, this is not a commitment by Gazprom. It is not even part of Gazprom's property. It's on the balance sheet of the Russian regions. I believe I have provided you with an extensive comment. Thank you. Thank you indeed. Thank you, Igor. And our next question is coming from Mr. Alexander Branis from Prosperity. Alexander, please go ahead. Alexander, you're most welcome. Well, I need a sec to select the right language. Can you hear me? Yep. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you for the presentation, and my congratulations to you for upon the transition to 50% dividend payout. Given the shock of last year, that's a major event for the company, and that's a major breakthrough as well. Mr. Strigov, I have this question about project financing. You talk a lot about it, and you invest a lot of effort. Please comment, if you may. What's the financing cost? How much more is it expensive? How different could it be from the traditional raising of debt? I'm not sure if you can give a delta or a spread. Maybe you can respond conceptually, but obviously you have a number of successful projects of the kind, and you may well want to describe your vision, whether you can give any number for us to understand the same. Thank you. Thank you. As soon as I hear Mr. Branis is going to ask a question, I get focused, like you know. I have shared the events of 2019, but at the end of 2020, some of the answers ended up with law enforcement chasing me, and I was nearly chasing me. But again, that was a surprise for me. But responding to a question, Gazprom really delivers against its commitments. Um, we have discussed that on numerous occasions, publicly and in caucus. Once the dividend program was adopted, we deliver against that, sometimes ahead of time, which is exactly what has happened. Responding to your question, indeed, project financing is more expensive than raising common debt, especially public debt raising. Although this is not a subject for us today, because we have more of equity investors, although some of you may also hold our bonds, maybe you, actually, Alexander. But as you know, Gazprom is not particularly keen to pay premium when doing placements on the market. At the same time, banks don't particularly enjoy Gazprom when they do project financing with us because, well, they get a premium, of course they do, but it's minimal. I try not to go beyond, I don't know, 50 basis points. That's the maximum I can afford. I'm very greedy in that sense. In ruble terms, that was key rate plus 2%, which would not really scare us away if you consider the maturity of 15 to 20 years. So that's a good market premium of 15 basis points only. Thank you. Understood. Thank you, Alexander. And our next question is coming from Alexander Burgansky.
Здравствуйте. Спасибо большое. Меня слышно?
Good evening, and can you hear me? Alexander, yes, we can hear, but we cannot see you. Frankly, let me try to switch that on. Yeah, you're getting the feed now. Thank you for the presentation and for this opportunity to ask a question or a few questions. I have three in total, actually. One relates to the Ust-Luga project. I'm wondering if I could find out some greater details about your plans as to when you intend to launch that facility, the contracts, the target market, whether that one is in demand, whether the LNG capacity would be utilized given new LNG capacities available and coming on stream elsewhere in Russia. My third question would target Mr. Markelov, like your production target for Chayanda this year, and also if you could reconfirm the floor for Chayanda in Kavekta in the long term, although Mr. Markelov isn't here, as far as I can see. And yet another question is probably a follow-up to Mr. Sedigov. When you suggest that the company has plans for a good free cash flow that would suffice to cover the dividend payment, I'm wondering if you are suggesting that the same free cash flow would also cover the interest, because your definition of FCF does not include interest payments. Thank you. Let me start with the last bit, as and my colleagues would follow up. Are you referring to interest on loans? That's an operating, interest on loans. That's a part of operating expense, and the free cash flow. Well, whether it's part of that, but if you're wondering whether we intend to pay all the interest we owe to the banks, yes, of course we have this plan, but that's part of the operating expense. Thank you.
Вы знаете, я готова про коммерческую
Well, I'm happy to comment on the commercial element of the Ostlager contracts, but my answer is going to be rather general. Um, Deliveries would be to countries in the Atlantic, as well as the Asian Pacific. Question: which year is that coming on stream? Quite unfortunately, Ms. Merkelova is not there. We wish you were with us. He would give more insight, frankly. He had some of the movements in his schedule, but Mr. Exutin can probably handle that. Indeed. Thank you, colleagues. Given the situation currently, the recent changes, we are looking up to the original deadline, that is the 31st of July 2024 and the 31st of July 2025 for phase one and phase two respectively. But again, as to the floor of the Chayanda field, given the current work, the floor of 25 billion cubic meters is targeted for 2024. Nothing has changed here. And the volumes to be delivered, well, it's pretty much within the contract. As to Kavikta, Kavikta is targeted to launch production at the end of 2022, feeding gas into the power of Siberia. And in 2026, we intend to hit 27.2 billion cubic meters in total. So as of today, we see no changes in our production plans for both projects. Could you also specify Chayanda production plan for 2021? Well, that's part of the production block rather than construction block. But given the capacities we need to commission, we're talking about 10 BCM. Thank you.
Спасибо большое, Александр.
Thank you, Alexander. We're also getting questions in the Q&A chat of this conference. Let me announce some of them. Here's a question to Mr. Rekaksutin. As part of the 2050 climate goals, natural gas is considered as bridge fuel to take the market to hydrogen and renewables. What is Gazprom doing in this regard? What's your vision of gas demand in Europe and China in the longer term by 2040 and 2050? Thank you. Thank you for your question. Well, natural gas is indeed the key type of fuel, not only in terms of the bridge fuel, but also post-bridge period, if you wish. I have commented extensively on that in the main section of my presentation. The climate goals confronted within Europe and also the environmental targets of China by the year 2060 would or could be tackled with the help of natural gas. Exactly. Given how strong it is in the energy mix of both Europe and China, you may well be aware of a new area to utilize natural gas, and that's for a reason, as we believe. Natural gas is a great source of hydrogen. Now, if you compare that with green hydrogen produced by electrolysis, and compare that with hydrogen produced with steam reforming and capturing of CO2, then this other second way is more economically feasible. As you are aware, research and development is currently going on to produce hydrogen from methane with the help of pyrolysis, so that carbon could be captured in its hard state as a byproduct, and that's a commodity product among other things, while at the same time working towards lower CO2 emissions. So we see a great future for natural gas. That's a type of fuel that helps address CO2 emissions and other greenhouse gases, and also be a great feedstock for an even more environmentally friendly type of fuel, which is hydrogen. So that's a positive thing for us. Now, a few words about gas consumption in Europe. We believe that gas consumption may well come down a little bit in Europe in the longer term as compared to the current levels, but that does not factor in the subject of hydrogen, which is currently very topical on the agenda today. And what our partners are currently doing, they're promoting actively pyrolysis technologies, piloting those technologies rather than testing in a lab. So that serves to prove the same end. As for China, we believe, and not only we, by the way, marketing agencies share that vision. Gas consumption in China is expected to double by the year of 2040. Now it's 260 BCM. According to forecasts, it could be as high as 460, maybe 640 BCM. So we believe the situation in China is very promising. As you can observe, many of our exports projects are really targeting the Chinese market. That's our vision in a nutshell. Thank you very much, Mr. Xutin. I would like to mark a few questions in the chat room on the subject of ESG. However, please be reminded that our Capital Markets Day or Investor Day is going to take 2 days rather than one. So we have an ESG session planned for tomorrow. Gazprom's representatives will be happy to tackle all ESG-related questions tomorrow. The next question from the chat room goes to Mr. Sadigov. Good afternoon. Thank you for this event. The dividend policy provides that dividend based on 2021 onwards would be at least 50% of IFRS net income, adjusted IFRS net income. What's the probability that the dividend based on 2021 or 2022 could be more than 50% of the adjusted IFRS net income? Thank you. As a responsible company, we adopt a dividend policy in order to act against it. So we have the number of 50 and we'll be delivering against that commitment. Thank you. Let's get back to live questions rather than ones from the chat. The next one comes from Alex Comer. JPM, please go ahead, sir. Alex?
Hello, can you hear me?
Да, Алекс, вас слышно.
Yes, Alex, we can hear you, but we can't see you.
A couple of quick questions for me. Just in terms of your longer term capex over the next 10 years, you gave a figure of about, I think, 1.3 trillion rubles. How do you envisage that coming out in terms of, is that going to be roughly flat across the period, or does it go kind of up and then down? Just to help me with my modelling. That's the first question. And then, look, you've commented on your belief of gas being a transition fuel and that transition window will extend, several decades. But, there are several forecasts out there that suggest that won't happen. The EU's own forecasts point to a significant reduction in gas demand post 2030. So just wondered, what is sort of plan B if it suddenly looks like gas demand is going to fall? And to that end, when might we see a commercial scale methane pyrolysis plant emerge?
Давайте тогда, наверное,
Let me begin with the last two elements of your question, if I may. As for the pyrolysis production units, pyrolysis production unit is already available. That's manufactured by Monolith, a company from the United States. It doesn't have a very high capacity, but at least it's up and running, at least according to statements from that firm. They're saying it's in mass production. There are a lot of lab tests at the same time. We have discussed with this with various experts. They and we talked to them. We started talking to them about 2 years ago. About 2 years ago, they suggested that a commercial production would take 5 to 7 years. So 2 years ago, it was 5 to 7 years. That means it's 5 to 3 years now, or 3 to 5 years from this point onwards. So we are actively involved in that as well as our partners in Europe. Now, why we believe that uh, methane is going to be popular still, and the forecast is favorable, even though other forecasts are available, as you have just outlined. Well, first and foremost, because of the environmental agenda, there is coal still used, and other liquid hydrocarbons are still used to generate electricity. So that's what we call an energy mix. So coal is coming down in the energy mix, while the share of coal is being taken by gas. That's one element which would take Europe to closer towards their environmental goals, and China is setting similar goals for themselves. Let me get back again to hydrogen production. Well, as of today, 70% of all hydrogen that is generated in the world comes from natural gas. This technology, even with steam reformers, that's the best studied technology. It's well, it's very clear, and the only question is how to store the captured CO2. Projects in CO2 storage are being currently implemented in Europe, among other things. That's why we believe methane is still going to be in demand, because it's a great source of hydrogen within a relatively short time span. Now, maybe Mr. Sidigov can comment on the investments. Yeah, on the capex. Well, 1.3 trillion. I don't think that was ever announced for the decade to come. We mentioned the number of 1.45 trillion for 2020, and 2021 is going to be somewhat at that level, maybe higher. As to the longer term, I don't think any long-term guidance was announced. Our long-term development program has 4 different cases with various conditions from case to case. And that also affects the capex from the best case to worst case, optimistic and pessimistic scenarios. So we have only provided guidance for the 2 years in question. Thank you. And one quick follow-up in favor of methane. There is something that we factor in already because it's there. I'm talking about lower indigenous production volumes in Europe, which is coming down faster as compared to original forecasts made earlier. That's another driver with a positive impact on methane consumption. And we're going to satisfy that demand with exports, given that the infrastructure is already in place. Thank you.
Could I just ask one follow-up? Have you done anything with regard to carbon capture and storage domestically?
Well,
my response to that will be comprised of 2 parts. We have been very active in studying CO2 storage since 10 years ago. And we have considered how we could store what we call buffer gas in our underground storages, and how we could replace that with CO2, thus minimizing the content of methane in the buffer gas. We have got some results of that research. We saw issues that were clearly there. And having obtained those results, we decided not to proceed with implementing any project. But experience was gained, and we are currently considering, like so far, we are looking into production of hydrogen with traditional methods, and we are considering at the same time various ways to store CO2, not in underground storages of gas, but in expired gas fields and natural underground reservoirs. That's one thing, and our colleagues who consume gas also come to us to work on similar projects. Another potentially attractive thing is using CO2 to improve well flows of oils. I cannot give you of oil. I cannot give you any particular project, but we are working on those to make them happen. Thank you. Thank you for your questions, Alex. And our next questions, several questions are coming from the chat room. They're all to Ms. Lena Burmistova, and the subject matter here is pretty much the same. Is Gazprom planning to book more transit capacities via Ukraine given higher prices in Europe? Thank you. Thank you for this question, colleagues. I believe you see our booking numbers so far. We remain flat. Europe had very cold winter. The same is true for Russia and also Asia. We're now looking at our balances, the resource, and we'll see how we can move on. Based on the results of Q1, actually. And colleagues, a quick remark. I have made a mistake with one number when commenting on Turkey, Q1 for Turkey. Indeed, 106% was the right number, but the absolute amount was incorrect. The actual number is more than 7 billion. Please make that adjustment. Thank you. Ms. Burmistova, that was our last question in today's Q&A session. Colleagues, I would like to thank all of you for joining, and I would like to hand over to Mr. Sadega for his final remarks. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Finikov. Thank you, colleagues. Frankly, I haven't drafted any closing remarks. What can I say? We have to live in this pandemic environment of 2020 and 2021. We have discussed this with our colleagues as to which format for the Investor Day we could pick. We didn't want to miss this occasion, so we decided to go ahead with an online event. Whether that has been successful or not, it's up to you to judge. We have tried to be frank with you and showcase every bit of our operations based on the results of 2020 and also looking forward into 2021, including our plans up until the end of the year. As we bring home to you our work, we try to do that as transparently as we can. Moreover, in the course of 2021, we'll target more meetings, either online or hopefully online, because we really wish to talk to you face-to-face and discuss a broader range of issues. I really appreciate your involvement in our joint effort today. Thank you very much. Stay safe and see you next time. We'll try to keep running, at least in this format, if you enjoyed. Thank you.